Hello, sweetie. Meet Lucia Navarro, a super talented executive at Morales Enterprises, caught in a whirlwind of emotions. She faces the chance to lead the fashion division, Guedia, along with a tense family dinner with the Morales family, and feels a special connection with Diego Morales. Will she be able to handle these life-changing decisions? And let's get started. In a store called Navarro's Corner, a sign announced first place for the new employee of Group S, the eldest daughter of the Navarro family. Voices spread as several women chatted, and a brown-haired woman with bangs tried on work clothes. Beside her, a woman and two boys congratulated her, saying the clothes were worth every penny invested. The boys praised their sister, saying she looked great and very mature in those clothes. However, she could only think about cost calculations. 5 working days per 52 weeks added up to 260 uses. If she wore them every 3 days, it would be 87 times. If she did so for 3 years, the cost would be $0. 0.1 per day, which was reasonable for someone who made long-term investments. Moving her arms, she tried on the clothes, realizing it might be the only thing she would wear for 3 months, which made her sigh and ask Lucia what it all meant. After all, she was a smart girl and knew she would do well wherever she went, but she couldn't help feeling worried. Work was different from school, with mandatory overtime, irrational bosses, and company policies. There would be moments when things happened for no reason at all. That's why the woman advised her 3 things. First, do what your superiors tell you without arguing or complaining. Second, tell people what they want to hear instead of what you really feel. And third, always smile no matter what. 10 years had passed since then, and Lucia Navarro had followed her mother's advice exactly, obeying her superiors, saying the right things, and always smiling. With her exceptional business insight, she became the best employee. First in the training workshop, first in performance evaluation, the colleague everyone wanted to work with, #1 in the company's sports day, first in the company trivia, first in customer satisfaction, among others. She excelled at everything and rose quickly, becoming the youngest senior manager in history, or at least that's what she hoped until the day before, when she learned she would be an executive assistant. Soon there would be an official appointment, and she would become the executive assistant and advisor to the CEO of Morales Enterprises, Diego Morales. Although she was a senior manager, they suddenly wanted to demote her to a secretary position after 10 years of hard work. This made her question if she had made some mistake, so she asked what had happened. Her boss denied it with a smile, because on the contrary, she was brilliant at everything. Despite that, he knew it was an unexpected move and regretted losing a talent like hers. Sighing, he told her that she was the only one in the entire company capable of handling the infamous CEO Diego Morales. Besides, he said that Alvaro Herrera would make her a suitable offer. The cypress pines formed a green barrier, and even the sunlight shining through them seemed harsh, a historical symbol of Korean business. This was also the home of the CEO of the Morales Group, Alvaro Herrera. Thinking about going to Herrera Corporation meant that her fate would soon be decided by CEO Alvaro. It was all or nothing. It could be the greatest opportunity of her life or the biggest crisis. Thus, CEO Diego Morales packed his bags to travel, looking ready for a vacation somewhere. Beside him, a suited young man called him, the manager Pablo Romero, who asked if he had had a good flight. He nodded while handing his bags to Pablo, who smiled and said the business trip must have been stressful. However, stressful wasn't the right word, because for Diego, the business trip was just an excuse. He hadn't taken a vacation in years, because he was too busy working. This was his chance to relax. 34 years ago, he had dedicated his life to Morales Enterprises to one day recover Herrera Corporation, only for Javier Ruiz to suddenly appear and take control of the business. Despite his anger, he let Javier handle everything and left on a business trip without notice, eager to see how the company would function without his presence. He got into the car heading to the condom apartment. Pablo, while driving, told him they had received instructions to take him directly to the strategy office upon landing. This surprised Diego, who sighed because he was exhausted and preferred to go home. When he received a call, annoyed again, he wondered who was calling him right after getting off the plane. Upon answering, he noticed it was Javier Ruiz, so he hung up quickly without thinking twice. He just wanted to relax. However, he couldn't because the car got stuck in traffic, where numerous cars honked, irritating him even more. Diego complained that it must all be Javier's fault again, especially because he kept calling. When Pablo agreed, Diego told him to hang up or answer the call. Then Pablo showed him that it was actually the secretary Lucia Navarro who was calling. This made Diego's eyes widen, wondering if it was the same one who had joined the company at the same time. Pablo confirmed it was her, while Diego thought he had always considered her strange, but now wondered why she was calling him directly. Pablo mentioned that he should probably answer, which made Diego question why, since it was annoying anyway. Upon answering, Lucia smiled and greeted him, saying that from now on she would be his personal secretary and executive assistant. This made Diego ask why such a talented manager like her would be his secretary and if it was all Javier's fault. With a nervous laugh, she replied that he could get the details later and that she would even pass the phone to Javier directly. Diego wondered if Javier had lost his mind, saying she wasn't his secretary and to stop joking. It was too much for someone who had just returned from a business trip and wanted to rest, so he asked her to inform him. Then he hung up. Lucia smiled and told Javier that Diego had hung up. Javier also smiled and asked her to continue with the schedule anyway. Meanwhile, Diego managed to find a moment to lie down in bed and rest, or so he thought, until his phone vibrated again with another call. He sighed, sat up in bed and answered, asking what had happened now. In response, Pablo asked if he could come in for a moment, mentioning that he was outside his house because Lucia Navarro also wanted to come in and was with him. This made Diego jump out of bed in surprise, asking how he had found out. Then Lucia took the phone from Pablo to speak to him directly. Diego questioned whether he really had to do everything they told him, since he had his own work. Besides, he had traveled all the way there. Still smiling, she replied that from that day on she would be his personal secretary and executive assistant. This surprised him even more, and Lucia nodded because it was a direct order from Herrera Corporation. She regretted that they didn't have much time to waste, so she would enter his house now, whether he liked it or not. This made Diego yell as he ran from the bed, but he tripped and fell to the floor, dropping his phone in front of the door. He hurried to get dressed before Lucia came in and saw something she shouldn't. However, Lucia opened the door anyway, greeting him with a good morning, only to see Diego barely getting up, blushing. Laughter, seeing him blush, she slowly stepped back and closed the door as if nothing had happened, leaving Diego yelling in frustration and embarrassment. A while later, he came out to talk to the two outside. Lucia commented that they still had 15 minutes left, asking if that was enough time for him. Diego denied it, saying he wasn't ready because he hadn't showered, was hungry, and had nothing to wear. Adjusting her glasses, Lucia reassured him that everything was fine, pointing to Pablo, who immediately showed 2 clean outfits ready to wear. Besides, they had prepared sandwiches for breakfast. Although Diego protested that he didn't eat sandwiches, Lucia insisted that it was a ham and cheese sandwich without vegetables, just as he liked, and they had also prepared eggs. This convinced him. Lucia said she would present a detailed agenda in the car, though he complained that it wasn't the most important thing. Pointing at her, he questioned whether a secretary really had permission to enter his house. Yes, it was personal space, and he could do whatever he wanted, even walk around naked if he wished. Getting closer, he asked if she could really handle that. She replied by asking if he felt uncomfortable because she was a woman. This made Diego fall silent before bursting into laughter, finding the question ridiculous. He didn't feel uncomfortable about something like that. Lucia smiled, concluding that it was a relief he felt comfortable with her, and added that they had 10 minutes left to leave. She also noted there was little time for his shower, so she instructed Pablo to bring the warm towel they had prepared, knowing this would happen. She put on gloves while Pablo helped with the cleaning products, ready to help him get ready, which surprised Diego. He questioned what all that was and why they were carrying those strange things, demanding they remove them from his sight. The two looked at each other for a long moment before Diego sighed, asking them to wait, saying he would finish washing in 5 minutes. He noticed her long, straight hair, her plain glasses, the two-piece suit, maintaining the same appearance for 10 years, something incredible. She hadn't changed anything since the first time he saw her. And yet, Diego had never liked how she irritated him. As usual, when they presented the top employees of Class 53. In the Morales Enterprises training group, Lucia received first place with applause from the others, followed by Diego. In second place, his whole life had been aimed at winning the title of successor to the Morales group. Fortunately, he met everyone's expectations, praised from childhood as gifted, though it was all thanks to his incredible effort. That's why Diego had never fallen from first place, but suddenly he was in second place for the first time in his life. That day, they were welcomed with applause as the two best employees of the company in front of everyone. Despite that, Diego was not happy at all, clenching his fists in fury until trembling. In the present, after the shower, he began drying his hair with the blow dryer, making sure to use the allotted 5 minutes, receiving praise from Lucia. They looked at each other again, and Diego, still surprised, never expected that of all people, she would become his secretary. He put on his shirt, telling her he didn't like clingy secretaries who were always by his side. After a moment of silence, she replied that she would try to adapt to his preferences. He began to disagree, saying he was very good at fake kindness and could tolerate people he didn't like. However, he wanted to be direct, stating that he didn't like manager Lucia Navarro at all. This made her eyes widen as she listened. From the first day of training, from when they put them in the same group, he didn't like her. He approached her, suggesting she resign. After another moment of silence that made her tense, Lucia asked permission to respond, saying they were actually 7 minutes behind, so they had to leave immediately. This surprised him because she simply ignored everything he had said. Both Lucia and Pablo pointed out that President Alvaro Herrera was waiting for them. The perfectly calm scene made Diego sigh, finally accepting to leave after finishing getting dressed. As they walked through the hallways, Lucia still remembered Diego telling her he didn't like her, wondering why. In truth, she didn't like him either from the first day they met over 10 years ago. Although he was supposed to be the heir to the Morales group, from her perspective, he seemed more like a spoiled prince. During the car ride to their destination, Lucia looked through the reflection. She couldn't help thinking that in terms of appearance, Diego was exactly her type. A week ago, Lucia had met with the CEO of the Morales group, Alvaro Herrera, who said he had heard a lot about her from director Javier Ruiz. She must be a very efficient worker, so he hoped she would take good care of his boy Diego Morales. This made her nervous, stammering that she still had a lot to learn, until Alvaro interrupted her, mentioning that he had heard her younger brothers were promising athletes in ice sports. If they were like her, they would surely be very talented. At Morales Enterprises, they liked to support talented athletes, reminding her of what Javier had said. Soon she would find out that Herrera Corporation would make her a suitable offer. The deep red in his eyes made Lucia break out in a cold sweat, wondering if that was what the director was talking about. When she left the meeting with Alvaro, she sighed because that conversation had been so intimidating it made her tremble. His fierce eyes looked at her as if saying she better do an excellent job. Taking a deep breath, Lucia tried not to stay scared for long. After all, she had worked hard and done well so far. Her twin brothers were probably very worried about money. If her younger brothers didn't have to worry about anything but training, that would be good. It was then, while thinking about them, that she received a call from her two brothers celebrating on the other end of the line. They were truly a family blessed with sponsorship from Morales Enterprises. Lucia stammered that she was happy for them, thinking that as long as they were happy, that was all that really mattered, even if she had to keep working under these circumstances. Back in the present, while thinking about how Diego was still totally her type, she had to hold back because she couldn't think too much about it. Taking a deep breath, she tried to stay composed because she needed Diego's approval at all costs to secure funds for her brothers and her family. Thus began her first day as Diego's assistant and personal secretary. When they arrived, the conversation between Diego and Alvaro began with the grandson bringing a gift as a souvenir, because he had received the same from him when he was a child. Smiling, he asked how his grandfather's health was, to which Alvaro replied that he was fine this time, though his shoulders were tense. Observing them, Lucia thought he seemed like a completely different person from the last time she saw him. When Diego suggested they go on a trip together, Lucia thought he seemed compassionate, but the grandfather replied that he felt more comfortable at home. For Lucia, it seemed Diego was the only person who could make Alvaro feel at ease. It was then that Alvaro began talking to her too, looking at her seriously while asking if she was doing her job well. She hesitated, wondering why she was getting that intimidating look, and replied that it was her first day, so some things could still improve. Alvaro agreed because they had arrived a little late, and Lucia promised it wouldn't happen again, clenching her trembling hands. This made Diego notice her reaction, wondering what was wrong, since she was acting completely opposite to before. The old man continued saying he expected a lot from her, and she replied that she wouldn't disappoint him, though she kept responding nervously that she would do her best to meet expectations. Diego thought she seemed terrified for some reason. It was then that Alvaro said he wanted his grandson to visit Herrera Corporation more often to greet and report on business, pressing Lucia to remember it, to which she quickly agreed. Alvaro insisted that Diego was the heart of Morales Enterprises, and that was why he needed the most talented employee from Morales as his assistant. This time it was Diego who stammered, agreeing that there was no one better for the job than manager Lucia, until he started talking about something that made Lucia nervous, worried that he would mention the incident of visiting his house and her role as secretary. Lucia didn't want to risk being fired on her first day, and he noticed she was really breaking out in a cold sweat this time. This made him hesitate before continuing, mentioning how she acted as his secretary, which made Lucia grab his arm, shaking her head with red, almost teary eyes, in a way Diego had never seen, which also made her nervous. After interrupting almost 3 times, Alvaro asked what the problem was and what he exactly wanted to say. Finally, Diego said he just wanted to thank his grandfather for appointing her as his secretary, ignoring the previous topic. Later, they left the meeting with Alvaro, and Lucia sighed in relief, exhausted after just one conversation. She almost felt it was because she had overexerted herself at work that day, so she returned to her apartment barely able to wait to shower and relax. She opened the door to her house, surprised to see her brothers run to greet her, happy because they had been waiting for her and even complained about how long she took to arrive. Her roommate, Marta Lopez, was also there, greeting her with a smile, noting that she must be tired and probably hadn't eaten yet, so she was preparing something. But Lucia was too confused and surprised by everyone's presence. Marta mentioned that she had heard the good news from her twin brothers, and that's why they were preparing a surprise party. After understanding, Marta told her to shower while the twins agreed to help in the kitchen. Seeing the chaos of the lively conversation, Lucia wondered what they were good for when she was the one carrying all the responsibility. Anyway, she went to shower and came out a little later, relieved after shedding some of the exhaustion. Marta commented that her older brother would arrive soon and they could eat together once he was there. This caught Lucia off guard, especially because the doorbell rang when Marta's brother arrived. She ran out to greet him, excited to see her brother after so long, asking when he returned to Korea and if he had gotten stuck in traffic. Shortly after, Lucia also came out of her room to meet Marta's brother, Carlos Vargas, who smiled at her after so long without seeing each other. Smiling, Lucia greeted him, surprised that he hadn't mentioned he was coming back. This made him laugh, saying she seemed the same as always in her reaction. Then he patted her head, making her blush a little. She pointed to her t-shirt, asking if that's what he meant, and he nodded because she still liked that childish character on her t-shirt. Kanda was her favorite character from the children's show Buyer Rangers. The more he fought, the more attractive he became, but he wasn't very popular among children. In fact, they were all like a big family, since they were born and raised in the same city, so they were naturally quite close. Since Lucia had graduated earlier than other children, she had no friends her age when she entered the country's best school at 17. However, both Marta and Carlos were part of her youthful memories, where they spent a lot of time together during that period. Carlos had been her senior in school and helped her a lot since she entered so young. He was like a reliable older brother. Now everyone was toasting together at the table, with Marta laughing because it was a shame that Lucia didn't appreciate the refreshing taste of beer. She always said she was missing one of life's greatest pleasures, which made Lucia laugh even though she didn't like alcohol, but it would be good to drink something on a day like that. Marta celebrated. Because the twins had received sponsorship from Morales Enterprises and Carlos had gotten a new job, so they were going to celebrate those achievements. This led the twins to comment that Carlos was really amazing for being hired by a law firm. It was truly admirable, and they asked if he was now back in Korea for good. Carlos nodded, saying he planned to settle there, having been assigned to work with Morales Enterprises. He asked in which department Lucia worked, and she laughed because she had just started working there. Marta mentioned excitedly that it was her first day as secretary, which made Lucia deflate immediately upon remembering. Marta kept asking her opinion about working with the infamous Diego Morales, and Lucia stammered in response. This made her friend laugh, noting her look of disgust to the point that she continued with questions, as if it were an interview. This was because Diego was the only paternal grandson of Alvaro Herrera, the CEO of the country's leading company, the Morales Group. From a young age, he had been the likely successor to Morales Enterprises, known for his doll-like appearance, capturing the nation's attention with his noble image. This attention led paparazzi and reporters to invade his privacy, which might explain why he avoided the media and disappeared from the public eye as he grew up. As a result, various rumors about his beauty spread like legends even now. That's why Marta was so excited that Lucia had been assigned to work alongside a third-generation heir so handsome that people traded cards with his photo. But Lucia had nothing to say about it, only that being his executive assistant could be a great stepping stone to success within the company. Slowly, Lucia agreed and said she would just be happy not to get fired, which immediately caught Marta's attention. Sweating a little, Lucia confessed that Diego didn't like her much, making everyone shout in surprise, asking why. She explained that they had started at the company at the same time. For some reason, they seemed incompatible, as he said he didn't like her from the day he saw her during training, and she also saw him as an idiot. They didn't get along, but they still had to work together. It was an uncomfortable symbiotic relationship. Sighing, Carlos commented that it must be stressful working with Diego when they didn't get along, but they had to spend all their time together. Still, Lucia replied that it was worth it for the incentives she received in return. Seeing the tension in her shoulders, Carlos said that money was important, but she should always remember that her health came first. In his opinion, she always worked too much. Lucia replied that she worked just enough not to worry him. He was too kind to her. If her boss were at least half as good, she wouldn't be in such a disastrous situation. As she said that, she suddenly received several messages telling her to prepare documents for a client meeting and bring them to his apartment at 7. This made her tense with irritation, annoyed because dealing with him was really a hassle. The next day, however, Lucia returned to her perfect secretary performance to meet Diego in the morning. She greeted him with a smile, but he replied that she was 30 minutes late, which was obviously a provocation. Lucia said she had arrived on time, but the main door password had changed, provoking an innocent look from him, as if wondering why. She said she adjusted the schedule so it wouldn't affect the workday, frustrated internally because that idiot Diego had changed the password to make her late. In response, Diego simply ignored it, listening to her say that when he was ready, she could report the day's schedule. He turned around, mentioning he was tired because he had just woken up. She replied that she had anticipated something like that happening and had prepared his breakfast. Seeing this, Diego grimaced, raising his hand to say he only drank coffee made with Kenyan beans prepared in a specific and balanced way, dismissing her effort and ordering her to get rid of that coffee, pointing across the apartment for her to throw it away. Despite being irritated, Lucia asked about the day's meeting and he yawned, saying he needed to rest a little more. She reminded him that director Javier Ruiz was waiting for him, but Diego seemed uninterested in going to see him, complaining about being awake so early. He told her to cancel the meeting, which made Lucia start trembling with rage, thinking she had only been a secretary for 2 days. For the first time in her 10-year career, she felt her patience was truly being tested, but she still agreed with Diego's words. Later, the two went to Diego's office, where Lucia reported that it would take some time to establish ownership of Morales Electronics, but the reorganization of Morales Enterprises was underway. The next steps were logistics, construction, trade, and the resort along with Morales Fashion. Sighing, Diego said he had left the Morales Fashion presentation for last, as it was the biggest headache of all. Morales Fashion was the foundation of the Morales Group, but its constant underperformance had become the group's biggest problem. Remembering this, Diego questioned how he could have been forced to deal with that business. Sales were slow, and there were rumors of selling the division. It was too hard to find ways to fix it quickly. Yelling, he said he had worked all these years only for Javier Ruiz to take all the truly profitable divisions while he was left with the problematic remnants. He didn't want to work, frustrated, because all he wanted was to leave everything behind. This wasn't good news, but for Lucia, it was obvious that Diego was not motivated to work at all. Observing this pitiful scene, she wondered how she was supposed to work with someone so unmotivated. What had happened to the determined Diego she met during training, who was always at the forefront of everything? Although he always seemed like a big idiot back then, at least he appeared somewhat worthy of the air title, at least from the outside, always so busy and working hard for his goals and future. Now Lucia remained silent observing Diego, which made him ask if she had just thought he was doing something wrong. She stammered that it wasn't the case, remembering she had to maintain composure as a secretary during her work there. Diego commented that she must have thought she was a rising senior manager before, but now she had to work with Diego Morales, who was going nowhere. She stammered that it wasn't true and she hadn't thought that at all, but rather that it was an honor to help him with his work. Standing up, Diego stared at her and approached, while she remained silent until she heard him say her lips were dry. Getting closer, he commented that she should at least find a way to moisten her lips before lying like that in front of him. After that, he returned to the desk where he was sitting, telling her not to do it again, and then stretched with a yawn. Meanwhile, Lucia blushed, touching her lips with her heart pounding hard after that sudden closeness and those words, wondering if she would really be okay there. 10 years ago, the new employees of Class 53 were warmly welcomed into the Morales family as everyone applauded during the event. As the presenter narrated, Diego observed Lucia beside him. She was the girl who had surpassed him as the best new employee of the company. Upon learning that, his grandfather told him to watch her during the workshop to assess if she had potential as someone reliable or if she was just too smart for her own good, his grandfather said. But even during the moments they spent in the workshop, Diego didn't want to think too much about Lucia. As he walked through the workshop hallways, people always talked about Diego, wondering if he was some kind of model and how he was the heir who had it all. When he noticed them talking about him and smiled, he always managed to make the girls smile happily because they had caught his attention. He was used to receiving that kind of attention from women. They couldn't look him directly in the face without feeling embarrassed or looking away, but it was a type of attention that Diego never liked. In fact, Diego always thought it was a huge nuisance. That's why, when he could walk in quiet places, he felt like he could finally breathe, away from the commotion of the other students. It was too exhausting to maintain a perfect image all the time. Until one day, he saw Lucia passing by while reading. He fell silent when she noticed his presence and then smiled at him, catching him off guard because Lucia did not look away. In fact, She made direct eye contact without hesitation, but she didn't stop or hurry. She simply walked past him naturally. However, for some reason, Diego felt offended by that reaction. He still remembered those moments when he woke up from a short nap in his office, wondering what kind of dream that had been. Love is magic. Then he heard voices outside saying they were coming in without knocking to announce themselves. Despite Diego asking her to wait, Lucia burst into the office cheerfully, bringing documents that needed his approval, irritating him because she always entered without permission. Still, he paused, looking at her, remembering the person he had met at the workshop, and fell silent. Lucia said she thought he might be sleeping, so she couldn't wait outside any longer. She tossed several papers and documents onto his desk, reports on the current resort project. He started to say it wasn't necessary until he stopped, realizing that Lucia had organized all the data perfectly. It was incredibly easy to read. Noticing he was impressed, she tossed the papers onto the desk and told her to stop exaggerating. She could work as hard as she wanted, but it didn't mean anything and no one cared. It wasn't as if the company couldn't function without him. But Lucia disagreed, saying that CEO Diego was an essential part of the company. All the employees knew what he had done for the company over the past 10 years, and she wanted to say once again how much of an honor it was to see him in action. Her words silenced him before he looked away and agreed that she could leave now. He would review the report later. Lucia nodded and asked him to let her know if he needed anything. Then she left his office. Later, Javier Ruiz came in, saying he finally had the chance to see Diego's face after so long and asked what had happened, because Diego had previously said he wouldn't work. The executives were delighted that he was back, saying he was doing a great job, to which Diego replied that it wasn't his work, it was Lucia's. Laughing, Javier said he always knew it was a great idea to have her as his secretary, and Diego questioned how he had managed to transfer her. He should know better than anyone that Lucia was too good to be just an ordinary secretary working like that. Javier laughed again and asked if Diego really didn't know. He should have investigated in the last few days, at least talked to the advertising manager. Then he mentioned that Lucia's twin brothers, university ice skating athletes Adrian and Mateo, were being sponsored. This made Diego suspicious, since according to their qualifications, they didn't seem eligible for it. Javier replied that the sponsorship was based on their potential. This left Diego silent before asking if they were doing this just to keep her as his secretary. Javier retorted that no one told him to quit his job and travel abroad. That's why they needed someone of her caliber to compensate for Diego's absence. From what he had discovered, Lucia's parents ran a modest restaurant, and the twins were athletes, which must be financially difficult for them. If the offer came from the corporation, it probably meant Lucia was not in a position to reject the proposal to work as a secretary. That almost irritated Diego, but Javier affirmed that Lucia was doing an excellent job as his assistant at the moment, so he saw no problem in keeping her close. After all, Diego knew her background, so it shouldn't bother him. This made Diego pause to reflect on whether he was really so conflicted with Lucia. Slowly, he denied it, saying that wasn't the case. Still, he touched his arm, remembering how she had grabbed it the same way before. He hadn't expected to feel that desperation in her touch, or see her pleading eyes seeking a way to maintain the situation. It made him feel a little uncomfortable. That must be it, or at least that's what Diego wanted to believe when he thought about Lucia. Another day, Diego was sitting quietly in his office one afternoon, with sunlight shining through the windows. It was a moment to enjoy a cup of coffee without commitments or major worries on a comfortable sofa, until he began to hear quick, firm footsteps in the hallway. He quickly opened his eyes, sensing the anxiety in those steps, turning and sweating nervously as Lucia suddenly opened the door and called him, asking if he had enjoyed his meal. This made him yell in fright, hand on his heart. He stared at her while she said she would now start the afternoon schedule summary, catching him completely off guard as she began talking nonstop. It didn't take long before Diego started complaining to Pablo that every day felt like he was in a thriller movie. Just the sound of her heels echoing from afar was enough to make his heart race, as if it were an unsettling presence waiting for his approval on things. Her heels were terrifying to that extent, and Diego always found himself trembling when hearing her approach. She was as terrifying as Lucia. She never left him alone for a second, and although he was her boss, he was still afraid of his secretary. Listening to these complaints, Pablo smiled and replied that it was just Manager Lucia's way, always full of passion and determination. Sighing, Diego could only imagine that Pablo's car was the only place where he could truly relax until the car started receiving a call from Manager Lucia. Pablo announced cheerfully that it was her, surprising Diego. Although Diego told him not to answer, Pablo did anyway, making Diego whisper to Pablo not to mention he was there. Although Lucia heard it perfectly, she knew he had no plans outside the office that day. He stammered that he couldn't because he had something to do, but it was impossible for there to be anything Lucia didn't know about him. She stated she had a lot of work to do now and couldn't get distracted, so she asked if she could call him later. Diego stammered no, that he was busy, which made her smile and reply that she would wait for him in the office. Despite saying that, Lucia always complained to Marta about how rude Diego was, returning much later than scheduled. Sighing, she wondered if he was a child. Marta comforted her because she had to deal with so many things at work. In their apartment, they received a visit from Carlos, who came straight from work to see them because he missed them. Marta joked that Carlos must be eager for the food from Lucia's mother, which he accepted with a laugh. This made Lucia pack several things her mother had sent for him to eat. Although he only wanted a little to satisfy his craving, she said it was fine because her mother had made a large portion even for her, so Carlos could enjoy his share. This time, they talked about how everyone seemed quite busy, even Carlos, but perhaps not as much as Lucia. Carlos commented that he had heard Marta plan to go on a blind date the next day, which surprised her, making her ask how he knew. He mentioned he knew she would meet the hospital director because they went to the same elementary school, surprising Marta once again. Carlos continued explaining that he found out when the director texted him about it 3 days ago. He said he tried to talk to Marta, but she responded coldly, so the director asked Carlos if he had done something wrong. Still nervous, Marta asked if she had done something wrong and if anything else had been said. Carlos mentioned the director only asked what she liked, to which Carlos replied that she enjoyed the French restaurant at the M Hotel and that it was very elegant and refined. This made Lucia think for a moment, feeling a bit tense. Then Marta started pushing her brother out of the house, laughing nervously as she kicked him out, saying they were going to sleep now. Although he didn't understand anything, Carlos accepted and asked Lucia to tell her mother he was grateful. Marta closed the door in his face. Sweating nervously, Lucia asked what they had just done, and Marta said nervously that everything would be fine, although both knew it wasn't fine at all. 3 days ago, Marta had asked Lucia to go on a blind date at an expensive restaurant, the French restaurant at the M Hotel, which Lucia knew was her friend's favorite. She stammered that it was a great atmosphere, but she wasn't very excited, asking who cared about the atmosphere on a blind date. Still, Marta begged her friend to help by asking her to go in her place. It was the last concert Marta wanted to attend before her idols enlisted in the army. If she missed that concert, she would never have the chance to see them again, and she knew how hard it was to get those tickets. Marta said her mother wouldn't arrange any more blind dates like that if she went this time, so she begged Lucia to go in her place in exchange for cooking and cleaning for a month. But Lucia didn't even want that. After begging for so long, Lucia finally gave in because it would only be a 1-hour date. Thus, Marta, a fashion editor with 8 years of experience, would be replaced by Lucia, who knew nothing about fashion and wore cheap, reused clothes. It was impossible for Lucia to pretend to be Marta, but her friend assured her there was nothing to worry about because she was a fashion expert and would solve this visual problem in just a few minutes. She promised to transform Lucia into the perfect Marta with her skills, or rather, turn her into a completely new Lucia. Time passed until finally the dinner arrived with the son of the hospital director, Gonzalo Ferrer. Marta was excited because she would see her favorite idols at the concert. She looked at Lucia and asked if she was ready for the date, at least mentally, and Lucia nodded nervously. Marta anxiously began her friend's visual transformation, seating her to start the work, bringing in a special guest to do her makeup that day. It was fun for Marta to imitate beauty gurus, so she always talked and played like that, smiling as she asked Lucia if she was ready for a makeover, showing an organic emulsion for sensitive skin, a brightening and soothing toner with snail essence. She would start with skincare first, touching Lucia's face and complimenting her on her great skin. Although Lucia had no idea what she was doing. Time passed while Marta worked on the face, hair, and everything needed to complete the total transformation. Not long after, when Lucia looked in the mirror, she gasped in surprise because she barely recognized herself. This made Marta smile, saying it was too early to be impressed. Now they could move on to the final version, which was the dressing process. Meanwhile, at the N Hotel, Pablo mentioned it had been a while since he had driven him to a personal engagement to meet his elementary school friends, which should be fun because it had been a long time since Diego had seen them. After dropping him off, Pablo wished him a good event, and Diego thanked him for driving him that weekend. He continued walking after receiving a message to head to the lounge bar, and so he did, looking for the place until he finally found it. Meanwhile, Lucia was lost because she would never know where a place like that was, since she had never been to such a place, which made her arrive late. The two took different paths, and it wasn't long before Lucia met the son of the hospital director, Gonzalo Ferrer, who smiled because he had heard she was cute, so he thought she would be petite, but she was actually tall and beautiful. The compliments made Lucia smile, thanking him while agreeing that she enjoyed the restaurant's food, though a bit nervous. In fact, she was so nervous she wasn't sure if the food was going to her mouth or her nose. Her fork barely touched the food properly. Marta had said she only needed to stay 1 hour, so she just had to wait 10 more minutes until the date ended. Then, Gonzalo asked if it would be okay to take her to the lounge bar on the top floor of the hotel. The bar was very famous for its cocktails. People said it was a fitting name because it had an excellent taste while viewing the city night lights. She covered her mouth with a smile, apologizing because although it sounded tempting, she still had to work the next day. Later, she left with a sigh of relief because it was finally over. The makeup had been uncomfortable since she wasn't used to wearing it regularly, and the contact lenses dried her eyes, so she decided to remove them and throw them away. Despite that, she remembered that Marta had booked a night at the M Hotel to enjoy the stay and had left everything ready for her to take advantage of one more night plus a free cocktail with no refund. Although she was still worried because she had to work the next day, it was quite a conflict. As she headed to the hotel, Lucia stopped to admire the place, realizing she had worked hard in recent months and didn't know when she would have the chance to enjoy a place like this again. She had also gotten dressed up just for this day. At least she could enjoy this night as Lucia. Meanwhile, Diego was drinking with his elementary school friends and chatting about various things while sipping wine. One of them asked why he still wasn't dating anyone, surprising Diego because they had brought up the topic so suddenly. The friend laughed, saying there wouldn't be another chance to talk about it, and asked if Diego planned to stay single forever, making him freeze. The others commented that he didn't have a potential partner to marry, maybe some professor's daughter. However, Diego asked why everyone was so interested in his personal life. At this point, there must be something more interesting than the life of a 30-year-old heir with zero dating experience. This made them all laugh, toasting and wishing him luck to finally find a girlfriend. Despite Diego's embarrassment, he watched as they opened a bottle of champagne and toasted together. They seemed more excited than Diego himself about the idea of him dating and marrying at that age. He simply decided to take another sip of his drink until he began to hear footsteps in the hallway that gave him a familiar chill. When he looked up, he saw Lucia walking nearby, completely capturing his attention. She passed right by him, but Diego instantly recognized her distinctive features. Still, he felt like he was losing his mind seeing her in a place like this so suddenly. He took his phone, thinking he should text her, and wrote some messages. This made Lucia take her phone and read them, surprising Diego again because it really was her in front of him. A few days ago, he remembered complaining to Pablo about Lucia's horrible phone charm with a ridiculous character that looked like an onion. She must be the only one with such a bad charm. Lucia replied to the messages saying she would be at her apartment the next day. As soon as she touched her phone, Diego received an immediate response, still making him sweat in surprise. He could hardly believe that Lucia was this impressive woman across the room. His friends quickly noticed he was looking at someone, pointing out the woman on the other side who looked like a model. They teased Diego, saying he seemed interested in her, laughing that it must be love at first sight. Diego told them to shut up, saying the woman just resembled someone he knew. Meanwhile, Lucia sat down to look at the menu, remembering that Gonzalo mentioned the bar was famous for its cocktails. Thinking it sounded delicious, she decided to try the drink, ordering it and thinking she could handle the alcohol. After all, she was staying at the hotel, so she could enjoy a bit of the night. Sipping the cocktail while listening to the lounge music, gazing at the night through the window, sitting alone at the table, smiling at her own reflection, feeling quite good about herself that night. It was then that Gonzalo appeared again, laughing nervously as he said he went to get a drink and thought she might like to see him again. The compliments made Lucia nervous because she had already ordered a drink, and it was strange since she couldn't drink much more. Still, Gonzalo sat with her to chat at the table, and Diego noticed from across the room, wondering what was happening. It didn't seem like the man was Lucia's boyfriend based on how they acted. Meanwhile, Gonzalo ordered more drinks, the Purple Rain, which women liked for its great fragrance, and a Sunset, which had a deep sweet whiskey base, serving them all so Lucia could drink and enjoy, filling the table with alcohol. Gonzalo mentioned he really wanted to buy those drinks for her, revealing he had read all the columns she had published. She always wrote that she loved cocktails, usually ordering at least 3 at bars, which made Lucia sweat coldly because she had completely forgotten that Marta loved drinking. It would be better to drink them quickly and leave. But to her dismay, Gonzalo kept talking while she drank, excited because he had studied all night just to go out with Marta, unaware that Lucia had trouble with strong cocktails. It was then that Gonzalo received a call from Carlos, stepping out to say he was with Marta now, laughing because Carlos seemed worried about his sister. Not only that, but he was also at the hotel and on his way. Although Gonzalo was about to take her home, the conversation made Lucia anxious, realizing she needed to find a way to leave before Carlos arrived and discovered the truth. Gonzalo returned to the table and apologized, saying it was rude of him to take the call and leave her aside. Noticing she still had a drink, he suggested they enjoy it slowly while chatting. Lucia thought that if it was the last one, she needed to finish it quickly. Seeing her drink so much made Gonzalo comment that she was really good at drinking, as he expected. But soon she began to feel the effects of the alcohol. Everything seemed to sway in her vision, worrying Gonzalo as she started to feel dizzy. Lucia stood up saying she was leaving, but Gonzalo mentioned Carlos was on his way and they could wait for him. She wanted to get to her room as quickly as possible. It was bad because despite wanting to leave, Gonzalo kept insisting she sit down again. Seeing the scene, Diego approached and questioned why Gonzalo was trying to stop someone from leaving like that. This made Gonzalo sweat coldly and stammer that it wasn't what it seemed, that Diego had misunderstood. This made Lucia feel the voice was familiar, but she couldn't recognize his face because she was too drunk. Everything felt too suffocating and unwell. Diego said he had been sitting nearby and saw everything, noticing how Gonzalo joined her even though she clearly didn't want to be there and was forcing her to drink. So he asked what Gonzalo's true intentions were. Gonzalo defended himself saying nothing had happened and even wanted to show his card. But Diego was taken by surprise when Lucia stumbled and leaned on his chest, making her look at him more closely. He looked away. Then he took off his jacket and covered her with it, making sure to hide her skin. Although Lucia Navarro was still confused and searching for her work document, it seemed Diego Morales noticed she was not in her right mind. Lucia apologized while suddenly searching for the document, which led Diego to wonder how much Javier Ruiz had made her drink that night. Javier stammered, assuring nothing had happened, explaining they were on a date with marriage prospects, showing his business card and promising he wasn't a suspicious or strange guy. This surprised Diego because she really was on a date. Javier accused Diego of being rude for interfering like that, to which Diego asked who he was to say that. Diego replied he was a colleague of Lucia's, crumpling Javier's card while staring at him. Lucia stammered, wanting to explain, and accidentally dropped the jacket. Diego bent down to pick it up, sighing for her to compose herself a bit. Then he was surprised once more when Lucia also bent down to pick up the jacket, exposing more of her body than she should. This made him blush even more as he wrapped her in the jacket, yelling at her to cover herself properly. He wondered why she had drunk so much to the point of being so careless, without even being aware of what she was doing at that moment. Javier asked who exactly Lucia was and what colleague Diego was talking about. Suddenly Carlos Vargas appeared, replying that she was Marta's best friend and roommate. Javier was bewildered by everything that had happened, and the conversation between the two led him to say goodbye and leave everything in Carlos's hands. Meanwhile, Diego wondered who this man was who had appeared so suddenly, but Carlos approached the CEO, bowing to apologize for the commotion. He explained he had been assigned as legal consultant for the company, but he didn't expect to meet Diego this way. When Lucia looked up, it took her a moment to recognize Carlos, freezing as she wondered what he was doing there. Then she remembered she could get in trouble if they discovered her, but she hadn't realized they had already caught her in the act. With that, the protagonist turned to hide behind Diego, grabbing his hand in a way that made him blush again. He wondered what was happening now, but noticed Lucia seemed as nervous as the last time. Carlos smiled, noting Lucia was too drunk, but said he would take care of her from now on and take her home. However, Diego interrupted, saying she was his employee and he couldn't hand her over to a stranger like that. He asked what their relationship was, to which Carlos replied they had been close friends since childhood, so there was nothing to worry about. He reached out to bring Lucia closer, promising he wouldn't say anything to Marta about what happened and that everything would be fine. He reminded Lucia that she knew she shouldn't drink so much, which made her laugh, while saying it had been about 3 cocktails followed by champagne. It was an expression that left Diego speechless. He had never seen her make that kind of gesture or smile before. Once again, Carlos apologized to Diego for all the trouble, saying he could introduce himself formally next time. With that, he removed the jacket from the protagonist to return it to Diego, but Diego interrupted. He covered her again, this time buttoning the jacket properly to ensure Lucia was fully covered while she just watched. Diego said they should bring her back tomorrow, but Lucia said nothing as Carlos put his hand on her shoulder, thanking Diego for taking care of the protagonist. He pulled her closer so they could leave, which irritated Diego in a way he didn't expect. But Lucia refused, saying she wasn't going home because she wanted to stay and have fun that night, laughing a little. Carlos agreed, saying he would take her to her room, which surprised Diego because he didn't expect him to take her to the hotel. Diego grabbed Carlos's arm, asking why he was taking a drunk girl to a hotel room. It was too strange. After a moment of hesitation, Carlos asked if Diego thought it would be better if he took her himself. After all, they weren't dating for him to defend her that way. The next morning, when Diego woke up in bed, he at least remembered meeting Lucia the night before. He went to the bathroom to wash his face and wake up, wondering what had happened. Supposedly, Carlos, a close friend, had accompanied her to her hotel room, and Diego could still remember Carlos smiling while saying Diego was being hypocritical. As he got dressed, Diego tried to convince himself that none of this was his business, ready to go to work. When they met in the car with Pablo, Lucia smiled greeting him, and he hesitated before responding. Seeing her like that made Diego think it must have been a good night for Lucia. She didn't even have a hangover. Moreover, she didn't seem to have trouble looking at him. But Diego didn't want to look at Lucia's face or hear her voice. It was annoying, but he didn't even know why he was always irritated by Lucia's presence. When they arrived at the office, time passed until lunchtime, when Lucia appeared to report that the food was ready. After a moment of silence, he replied he wasn't hungry and turned his face away, also asking her to cancel all afternoon meetings because he didn't feel well. Lucia agreed, leaving the office while thinking she needed to return the jacket to Diego somehow. She shuddered, feeling like she was losing her mind after everything she did the night before, blushing as she wondered if she should pretend not to remember or face it and apologize, but it seemed her boss didn't want to see her that day, which was both worrying and understandable, making her feel even more embarrassed than before. It was a distance that left both tense. Later, Diego got into Pablo's car, asking him to just drive around a bit. As he rested his head against the window, he sighed. Pablo said he would take him toward the river, suggesting it might be good to get some fresh air through the window while driving. This caught Diego's attention, making him ask if he looked sick, to which Pablo replied that he always called when something worried him. That's why Pablo thought about where he could take him to help him relax, making Diego pause and think how quickly the manager understood things. Then, Pablo mentioned it was Lucia who told him there was nothing better than running along the river when something weighed on the mind. This surprised Diego, learning that Lucia ran, and Pablo confirmed it, revealing that Lucia enjoyed exercising for fun, running 10 kilometers every time she went out. Moreover, she found time to train even with her tight schedule, which impressed Diego. It took him a moment to realize he was blushing, and he yelled at Pablo to drive more quietly because he talked too much, making Pablo apologize. That night, Diego ended up joining a family staring intently, asking if she was trying to annoy him. She laughed, saying she was just worried about him. He stood up to get some fresh air, but before leaving, he said he wanted to talk to Javier outside. The two went out to the garden, and Javier opened a beer, commenting that it was a warm night. Diego was surprised to see him not only start drinking, but nearly finish the beer in one gulp until it spilled down his neck. This made Diego think Javier was a fool. It was obvious his throat must have burned after that. Then Javier mentioned that Lucia had told him women found it sexy to drink like that, but Diego couldn't believe it. In any case, he got straight to the point, saying he had something to discuss with Javier about the manager Lucia. He wanted her returned to his team immediately. Javier smiled and rejected his request, surprising Diego because he didn't even ask why. Javier replied that they had hired excellent staff and Lucia was someone who did an incredible job, so there was no reason to return her to his team. Diego looked away and said Javier should know that Lucia was too good to be just a secretary. This made Javier smile because she was perfect for the job, but he wanted to know if there was some other problem with Lucia that Diego wasn't telling him, which made him fall silent. The next morning, Marta burst into her brother's room, shouting and calling him to show him the news. Photos from the hotel bar suggesting they were having an affair. She smiled and asked what all that was about, but Diego didn't even know what was happening. Marta told him they had caught him with an unknown woman. Having stayed out of the public eye, Diego had suddenly been seen in a hotel bar with a woman who wasn't a celebrity. Pressing her brother further with a big smile, she asked who this woman was, forcing him to sit down. But before he could say anything, Marta decided to guess that it was the manager Lucia, making Diego blush and ask how she knew. Marta burst into laughter, saying she didn't know. She had just guessed and hit the mark, but she was surprised because she never thought she would see her brother with a woman in his arms. He didn't even like being touched, So it was incredible that something like that had happened, leading her to guess it might be the start of an office romance. Diego denied it, saying it wasn't true, though she insisted otherwise, reminding him that he also needed some romance in his life. That's why she pressed him to know if he was interested in someone. He had to find someone to date, flirt, and all that. When her brother kept denying it, Marta theorized that he might be seriously considering an arranged marriage with her. An arranged marriage that, as their parents said, would bring harmony between the Morales and Lopez families and establish him as the legitimate heir. Marta asked if that was why he had never slept with anyone before, making Diego shout again that it was nothing like that. Shrinking back, he said he had no interest in an arranged marriage, but that didn't mean he wanted to date just anyone. Blushing, Diego stammered that he would date someone he fell in love with at first sight, making his sister laugh even more at the scene. Still teasing Diego, Marta called him the most sensitive man in the world with a pure heart and all, even though he tried to hide it. The two argued for a long time until Marta winked, wishing him luck with his romance and thanking him for her allowance as always. After she left, Diego was left alone, still blushing from the embarrassment of all his sister's teasing. The next day, Lucia apologized to Diego for the trouble she had caused in his personal life the night before. Her formality made him a little nervous, and he awkwardly replied that there was nothing to apologize for. It was his fault for getting involved in her personal matters. However, Lucia disagreed, saying that as his secretary she had failed to prevent something ridiculous, false, and cowardly from happening, so it was entirely her fault. She was serious about doing everything in her power to ensure nothing tarnished his status as CEO after that article was published. That's why she bowed several times, clearly embarrassed, though Diego assured her everything was fine. He changed the subject to the scheduled meetings with the construction company and prepared to leave while she went to get the car ready. The two took the elevator down, and Diego wondered if what had happened really warranted so many repeated apologies. Deep down, it seemed to Lucia that everything was just part of the job, simply another matter she needed to handle. She was just doing her job as secretary, which made him question what he was expecting exactly. When they stepped out of the elevator, they were suddenly greeted by a crowd of photographers firing their cameras at them. The sudden tension made Diego freeze with his heart racing from nervousness, anxiety, and discomfort. Lucia noticed it quickly and ran to wake him from his shock, grabbing his shoulders when she saw him stumble and cover his face. She worried when he turned pale and started gasping, trembling severely in the middle of a panic attack that made him feel like he was going to vomit. This also made her tense. Of all times, this had to happen right now. It was then that Pablo appeared, speeding toward them in the car and shouting for them to get in quickly, which they did. The car sped away from the building with Lucia calming Diego, asking if he was okay. He could barely breathe, so she urged him to at least try, though his voice seemed to fade away. It wasn't long before Diego passed out in her arms, still sweating profusely after the panic attack. In his memories, Diego could recall when as a child Morales Enterprises had been inherited by Diego Morales, and the whole world had its eyes on him. Throughout his life, the camera flashes had blinded him, photographing him every day without giving him privacy or space to live his own life. He was ordered to always behave, never let his guard down. He was the face of Morales Enterprises, the future of the company. The bright lights had always made him anxious and nervous since childhood, and this time was no different. Unconscious, he heard a voice calling him repeatedly until he finally woke with a start. Sitting up slowly in the bed, he sighed upon realizing he had fainted and ended up in the hospital. Though he thought he had improved, it seemed he still struggled with it, which reminded him how worried Lucia Navarro had been. He noticed her sitting on a nearby sofa, deeply asleep after spending time there with him. This made him wonder if Lucia had stayed by his side the whole time, even staying up so late, and she must be exhausted. It wasn't long before Lucia also woke up, startled to see that Diego had gotten up. She helped him sit back down, warning him that he shouldn't get up yet and needed to rest. Though he insisted he was fine, He told her to go home because she must be tired. However, Lucia refused, saying it was her fault for not taking care of his health, so she would stay. After all, he had been skipping meals lately, and she would make sure he ate well before leaving. This surprised Diego. She was acting as if he were a child, but she didn't mind and went to get him something to eat. Lucia knew the food probably wasn't to his liking, but he had to eat it all, which made him grimace. She informed him that she had ensured everything that happened that day remained confidential, so there was nothing to worry about. Slowly, he thanked her, and then he heard a growl from Lucia's stomach, which made him laugh a little while she blushed in embarrassment. He asked her to go out to dinner now because he wouldn't eat until she came back with something for herself. When both sat down to eat, Diego commented that he had thought she was a robot, but now, seeing her messy hair and the fact that she was eating too, she seemed to have a human side. This made her reply that she would fix it, though Diego quickly clarified that it wasn't criticism, just an observation. Slowly, he began to share that the first time he fainted was at age 20. His father had always been very demanding, and from a young age he had been told he had to be perfect and composed all the time. Reporters constantly followed him looking for something to write about, so his father asked him to be cautious, and he always was. Diego lived with constant anxiety, never risking tarnishing the company's image with something he said or did. Reporters harassed him waiting for any mistake, bombarding him with blinding camera flashes. At one point he thought he would get used to the flashes, but even over time that never happened. One day, during a family photo session, a flash went off right in front of his eyes and he suddenly collapsed, fainting on the spot. After telling this story, he joked and smiled at Lucia, suggesting they rest for a while. Diego felt a little embarrassed for talking so much and asked her to keep eating, which made her fall silent. She thought Diego had gone through much more than she had ever imagined. Later, Lucia said she would return at 8 in the morning with preparations for the morning video conference. This made Diego check his watch, commenting that it was already very late and seemed too early to do this the next day. Lucia replied that the schedule had been disrupted the day before, so it would be hard to reschedule. The documents were already ready, so there was nothing to worry about. But before she could leave, he mentioned that only a few hours were left until the meeting, so she might as well sleep there. However, even he didn't know what he was thinking when he suggested that, leaving Lucia confused. He quickly joked for her to leave, still blushing as he watched her go, holding his head and wondering if he had hit it when he fainted or something like that. The next day, he woke up still, feeling tired, though he had slept well. He had barely finished a yawn when he heard Lucia knock on the door. She appeared smiling and guided him through the day's meeting as planned. Diego watched her thinking she was impressive because though she must be exhausted, she didn't show it. She seemed the same as always, while he didn't feel that way at all. He had said many unnecessary things the day before, though it wasn't like him to be so emotional. When Lucia finished, she informed him that the morning meetings had been rescheduled, leaving his agenda free the rest of the day so he could recover. He stammered a thank you, and shortly after he received a visit from his sister Marta Lopez, who had heard he was free that day. She arrived to deliver a bouquet of flowers on behalf of their mother, Carmen Morales, who insisted on visiting him since he was in the hospital. Hearing that his mother knew made Diego freeze, and Marta nodded, explaining that she had gone to Busan to get medicinal herbs. While they talked, Lucia smiled, noticing how close Diego's family was. When Marta approached to greet her, Lucia did so formally, and Marta commented that she had seen her before in employee competitions, praising her for coming in first place. Beside them, Diego crossed his arms and told Marta to leave now that she had fulfilled her purpose, but his sister refused and pulled him aside, whispering that she would help him or perhaps reveal a secret, leaving him confused. Still, Marta approached Lucia again, smiling and suggesting they go out for coffee, leaving Diego alone in the room. The two walked the streets with coffee in hand, and Marta commented that Lucia must have been exhausted the day before. Lucia agreed, saying she never expected to see him faint like that, but it was a relief to see him better today. Marta added that it wasn't rare for Diego to faint. She had never seen him relax since they were children. Their parents always expected him to be the perfect successor and a role model. Their father, Alvaro Herrera, was an ambitious man but lacked the skills to achieve his goals, which led him to lose favor with their grandfather Alvaro Herrera. To regain his position in Morales Enterprises, he began using his eldest son Diego, who always worked hard to meet expectations and gain recognition. When Diego turned 20, Javier Ruiz appeared, now known as Javier Ruiz. Marta commented that Lucia probably knew Javier's story, which made many headlines at the time. The youngest daughter of the Herrera family, someone, had fallen in love with a volleyball player and disappeared. No one heard from her for 20 years until her son's existence was revealed after her death from leukemia. Javier had nowhere to go, so Alvaro accepted him as his grandson, giving him his current name. For Diego, who considered himself the only heir, it was like a sudden threat, so he worked hard for 20 years not to lose to Javier. Until recently, when a mistake by their father gave half the company to Javier's side, he must have felt like his whole world had collapsed. This made Lucia realize she had always judged Diego, seeing him only as a spoiled heir. Marta said her brother hadn't even had a chance to rest before starting to work and was under immense stress. That's why she was relieved that Lucia was by his side now, looking at her expectantly, as if wanting to call her by name. Lucia agreed, thinking it was a sad story that even reminded her of her own twin brothers. Then Marta hugged Lucia, complaining that her brother was an idiot who didn't know how to relax and kept working even in the hospital. Still crying, she asked what they could do to make Diego relax a little, which made Lucia hesitate, as she had a weakness for women's tears. Determined to fix the situation, Lucia resolved to help, which made Marta celebrate knowing she had achieved her goal. When they left the hospital, all in the car, Gonzalo Ferrer confidently stated he was an expert in trips and they could leave everything in his hands. Diego didn't understand why they were suddenly traveling to Gangnam. Despite Marta's pleased smile, Lucia said proper rest was excellent for recovery, besides improving productivity and creativity, which would benefit his work. That's why she wanted to help him rest. Diego hesitated before accepting, looking away as he muttered that he just needed a few days of sleep and a trip was exaggerated. Still, Lucia smiled because, despite his complaints, he seemed quite excited from her perspective. This made her feel a little sorry for Diego, thinking he must have worked too much to end up in this situation. That's why she was now determined to make sure both enjoyed this trip together. Gonzalo Ferrer had gone through several stages in his life. From elementary to high school, serving as entertainment club president, university representative, and in the automotive engineering department, president of a self-managed car club, and much more. Lucia recognized his efforts and everything he had achieved, so she chose him as driver for this trip. He had even booked excellent accommodations, which led Lucia to thank him for organizing the itinerary for everyone. Diego was confused by how far they were traveling, and Marta laughed, saying there were few new people around, but it was better, eagerly anticipating future events. They headed to the JM Sak pension in the hills of Hauran, the healing pension of freedom, an almost stellar place. People always said it was one of the best accommodations in the area, with a beautiful view of nature. Another reviewer mentioned it was perfect for a family trip, ideal for relaxing, and thanked that everything was prepared in advance. They had booked the highest-rated room, and even Gonzalo was impressed because the place was exactly like in the photos. He showed the girls' room and the identical one for the men, highlighting how spacious it was, with a beautiful natural landscape as a bonus. Somewhat surprised, Diego asked if the four of them would really sleep there, and Gonzalo nodded, saying the room was big enough for 4 people. They began unpacking from the trip. During the process, Diego thought it was a bit strange to share a room, as he couldn't handle the idea of sleeping near someone, thinking he wouldn't rest properly that way. Meanwhile, in the girls' room, Marta was surprised that Lucia had brought so few things for the trip. Lucia said she had made sure to pack just enough to be comfortable. Even Marta noticed that Lucia probably didn't take vacations often, so it was necessary to make this trip feel like one. Shortly after, Gonzalo asked if the girls were ready, and they agreed, prepared to go explore the area. They went down the stairs from the girls' room. And Diego noticed that Lucia had changed her outfit for the outing, making him blush as he asked his sister why they were dressed like that. She cheerfully replied that it was because they were on vacation, whispering that Lucia had an incredible figure. This made Diego even more nervous as Gonzalo guided Lucia to the entrance where the car was parked. Marta suggested they could split into groups since they had little time. She could go shopping with Gonzalo, leaving Lucia and Diego to explore together and see if they found something fun nearby. With that, they said goodbye laughing before leaving the two alone near the hotel building. Lucia said she would return after exploring the area, and Diego added that they could go together. They walked through a forest, and Lucia asked if he had ever mentioned that she liked that trail. Diego replied that he didn't know because he hadn't been to places like that often. Lucia said that when she was younger there was a mountain like that near her house that became her and her friend's favorite park. They went to the mountains together, looked at flowers, caught insects, and played under the summer sun. The smell of that forest brought back those memories. Diego agreed that it seemed like a good memory. Then Lucia pointed to a tree full of wild raspberries known for the shape of their fruit. She approached to eat them, which worried Diego, who asked if it was safe to eat something like that suddenly. She reassured him, saying they were fine, sweet, and delicious, smiling as she offered him one to try. He opened his mouth and accepted the fruit she gave him, chewing slowly until he complained because the raspberry was bitter and sour. Lucia realized some of the berries weren't ripe. They continued walking for a while, admiring the landscape together, enjoying the river, the beauty of the flowers, and all the nature around them. When Lucia offered him a flower, she thought she had never seen Diego so calm and relaxed before. This made her happy because he really seemed to be enjoying his time there. It was a relief for both. Later they sat on the grass, and Lucia mentioned something the CEO had said before about relaxing the shoulders and living a little. She thought this might be a good time to rest. That's why she was happy he had accepted this trip, which made Diego blush and look away, admitting he had never been to a place like this before, but now he was enjoying it. Until they noticed it started raining, they stood up and tried to cover themselves to escape the rain. Diego suggested they go back. So they started running, but the ground was slippery. He warned Lucia. As they walked, watching her climb a rock. He took her hand just in time when she slipped, surprising her with his quick reflexes. At the same time, Diego asked her to give him her hand, and Lucia thanked him for accepting his suggestion. Diego felt he was losing his mind. Though it wasn't summer, he wondered why it was raining so much. They stopped near a station, sitting on a bench completely soaked. He looked at Lucia for a moment before taking off his wet jacket and placing it over her shoulders, telling her the assistant manager would arrive soon, so she should use the jacket to stay warm until then. But upon looking closer, Lucia replied that he seemed to need it more than her. She asked if he was okay, noticing how soaked he was as she reached out a hand toward him. This made Diego blush, stammering as he pulled away, saying he was fine, just a bit heated from running. Still, Lucia noticed his face was completely red and asked permission to touch his forehead, thinking he might have a fever and they would have a problem if he caught a cold. Diego pulled away again, trying to deny her concerns, but he could feel something wasn't right to the point of feeling nauseous. It was then that Gonzalo and Marta arrived with the car, surprised to see them soaked from the rain, and told them to get in. During the ride they commented that the rain had come out of nowhere, though it wasn't in the weather forecast, so it was understandable that it had caught them by surprise. The car hit a pothole and Lucia's and Diego's knees accidentally touched, making Diego blush as he looked out the window. But Lucia didn't even notice, focused on her conversation with Gonzalo and Marta as they continued on the road. Back at the building, the four gathered to prepare something for dinner, and Diego watched Lucia from a distance. Everyone worked together to make a barbecue and enjoy the time, but Diego couldn't stop looking at Lucia's smile the whole time. Later that night, He went out alone for a while looking at the remains of the flower he had kept from the forest. Suddenly, Lucia called him, making him quickly hide the flower in his pocket upon seeing her approach. She said she had been looking for him and asked why he was there alone. Diego replied that he just wanted some fresh air. The two sat down and Lucia confessed that she had really enjoyed the day. Maybe he hadn't noticed because she had been working nonstop, but now that everyone was having fun together, she felt like she was finally moving forward without looking back. After a moment of silence, Diego agreed that he had been living intensely and now felt like he was holding her back too. This made her smile, replying that it wasn't true, explaining that since she was young she had excelled in everything because she was smart, so she always did well in school, even when she had to work after graduating high school due to her financial situation. She thought everything would turn out fine. Diego smiled and agreed that she had done a good job. Lucia continued saying she could do well as his assistant, adding that until he reached the top of Morales Enterprises, she would be by his side and work hard to support him in any way, delivering great results. Lucia's determination made Diego blush a little, timidly accepting and asking her to do so. Shortly after, one of their phones started vibrating with a call, and Lucia realized it was hers. She apologized to answer it, and Diego told her it was fine, letting her step away to respond. It was Carlos Vargas on the line. They talked, and she explained she was at a workshop with her company colleagues. When they returned to the company, no one could avoid noticing that Diego had a slight hidden smile behind his usual cold attitude. His sharp comments were wrapped in a soft voice, revealing an inherent arrogance that neither his manners nor his rigid posture could hide. The distinctive traits of someone who had been in power all his life, the Crown Prince of Morales Enterprises. As she followed Diego, Lucia began to inform him about his agenda, reporting that he had a dinner scheduled with some CEO at 5 in the afternoon. After dinner, there was a spa service booked for 8 in the evening. He agreed with everything she reported. Lucia felt that Diego was acting like a completely different person since they returned from the rest trip. Now he was 10 times colder than before, making her wonder if everything she saw on the trip was just her imagination. Deep down she felt Diego had always been like that, but for some reason now he acted more distant. They spent time together, even inside the car, and Diego sometimes looked at her when she was distracted, quickly turning his head when she started talking, ready to review his agenda, and he felt almost startled because she had nearly caught him spying on her. Lucia mentioned he had a business report at headquarters at 10 in the morning and lunch with some executive at noon and so on. This reminded Diego, as she had mentioned in that call, that she was just working during the trip. He thought that if she liked work so much, he would let her do it endlessly, without hesitation. At one point, Diego went to Lucia's desk and handed her several documents asking her to organize everything before the next day's meeting. She accepted immediately, but when she finished, he commented that the eligibility wasn't good and asked her to reorganize it and bring it back. However, then he asked her to go back to the original version because it was better than what she had done, and Lucia simply accepted his requests despite the mountain of tasks he had assigned her the previous week. His tone and attitude remained unchanged. Diego knew she hadn't changed since the last time they met, but that frustrated him. One afternoon, Lucia knocked on his office door to inform him that dinner was ready. This time it was mushroom risotto from Restaurant F and wheatgrass juice. She thought it would be more convenient for him to eat this instead of his usual salad, making Diego realize it was his favorite dish when dining at restaurants. It was perfect, as expected, but still he took a bite before discarding her food. He said that if it was to her taste, she should eat it, and also that he didn't drink things like wheatgrass juice. Though initially disappointed, Lucia smiled politely and informed him that as a precaution she had prepared other dishes for him. This time it was a special porridge from Hotel L, and she wished him a good meal. Despite feeling almost furious because it was delicious, Diego was irritated precisely because it tasted so good. Shortly after, he passed by Lucia's office and was surprised to discover that she had really eaten the previous food. When he asked why, she replied that he had told her to eat it, though he clarified he hadn't said it literally. Lucia asked if he wanted to eat it again and if she should order more, which made him shout in denial, saying he had already eaten the porridge. Sighing, Diego asked if she did these things on purpose to show off, but she elegantly denied it, saying she was just eating there to save time because she still had a lot of work to finish that day. Diego sighed again, asking if she was really okay eating that. This made her hesitate before replying that she had washed the spoon, so there was nothing to worry about, making Diego feel like he was losing his mind. He took his juice and drank it all, making her stammer that she had already started drinking from that glass, but he couldn't care less as he wiped his mouth after drinking, saying it was originally his, and if she wanted to drink it, she could order another. This made Lucia fall silent. Then he pointed to her computer screen, saying she had done a good job organizing the slides, praising her performance. After that, he left the room, and when he was alone, he started laughing to himself, still blushing, remembering how tense Lucia had gotten when he whispered in her ear, hoping she had felt something because of it. He had seen Lucia blush that time, thinking she looked great that way, which made him smile nonstop. Take care and use protection. Hello, sweetie. Meet Lucia Navarro, a super talented executive at Morales Enterprises, trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. She faces the chance to lead the fashion division, deals with a tense family dinner with the Morales family, and feels a special connection with Diego Morales. Will she be able to handle these life-changing decisions? And let's start. Time passed normally at work until one day Diego couldn't help feeling tense when Lucia called him. They headed to the meeting room, where she apologized to those present, asking if they had waited long. Seated at the table was the legal representative from MP, Mateo Jimenez, who greeted the CEO with a smile and introduced himself as the legal advisor for the FA case related to the Ban Resort. Beside him was also Carlos Vargas, another lawyer accompanying him. Diego recognized him immediately and greeted him, but it was problematic because this unfortunate guy was starting at Morales Enterprises. This time Diego thought while shaking Mateo's hand that the negotiation for the merger and acquisition project of the Morales Enterprises resort, which was steadily advancing, was now in full swing. A task force had been established in the resort business division for FA, but Diego wondered why, out of all the firms, they had to send Carlos. Looking at him clearly made him uncomfortable, although he himself had chosen the firm in the first place. As the work progressed, Lucia felt they had a heavy workload. From busy secretary tasks to assisting the team, she had become so consumed with work that she barely noticed the passage of time. Moreover, for some unknown reason, Diego had been treating her harshly for some time. Thinking about it made her feel it was quite childish on his part, but it was something she could handle. Meanwhile, Diego was busy with his own tasks, still thinking about his interactions with Lucia. He noticed she seemed a bit exhausted lately, which made him wonder if he had been too hard on her, but he shook his head, reminding himself that he was the boss, and it was natural to assign tasks to employees. Maybe he was just overthinking it. When he went to Lucia's office, he wondered where she was, because he couldn't find her around. Approaching her desk, he noticed there was a large amount of things piled up, and it seemed she wasn't even managing to eat properly. This made him complain mentally. If Lucia had problems, she could have said so from the beginning. Diego decided to go to the area where the employees were, surprising them with his presence, but he reassured them, saying it was nothing serious, explaining that he was just passing by. The men commented that his attention to detail was boosting team morale. They had received several messages through Secretary Lucia recently and remarked that the secretary was especially exceptional, always knowing everything. She must surely be quite busy with her personal life too, but it was impressive how quickly she handled things. Diego agreed, thinking the same. She always did an excellent job as his secretary. Then he asked where she was now, and they replied that she was probably with the FA team, which led him to turn quickly and head there without hesitation, wondering why she was with them at that moment. He walked to the room where she was supposed to be. Inside, Lucia was working on her computer, talking to Carlos and Benjamin Navarro beside her, which irritated Diego from a distance. He observed, wondering when they had become so close, unable to avoid cursing mentally. Then he opened the door, surprising everyone, which led Lucia to ask what had brought him there so suddenly. Smiling, Diego commented that she seemed busy, and she nervously replied that she was finishing delivering the documents. Carlos interrupted, expressing his gratitude, saying he had requested the documents earlier in the office and Lucia had given him a flawless report. Even the auditors were impressed when they saw it, and it was all thanks to her. Diego continued saying that, indeed, she was very competent, probably too busy now to handle such matters. He asked if she had compiled the status of the construction contract for the overseas project and about the progress of the expansion project in Saudi Arabia. Lucia replied that the data was organized and the corresponding department was compiling the expansion statuses. Everything would be ready by 3 p.m. This led Diego to question if she didn't know what her priorities were, and she promised to correct it. Diego then approached Carlos, reminding him that the data should have been organized by him, since that's what he was hired for, and asked if the secretary of the CEO of the Morales Enterprises business department was his friend or something like that. Hesitating, Carlos apologized, saying his lack of attention had caused problems with the work, and Diego agreed that it was so. As he left, he asked if Lucia would accompany him, and she nodded, saying she would. The two left while Diego wished everyone a good continuation of their work, still with that smile that made everyone tense. He also ordered that they not interfere with his secretary as he closed the door behind him, still looking at everyone. Then, Lucia's childhood memories began to resurface about how she, Marta Lopez, and Carlos Vargas were always together. Even Carlos could remember how they ate raspberries in the forest, or how she had changed from the girl she was to the woman she had become. At that moment, he had asked her when his enlistment would be, and Carlos told her it would be the first week of the following month. Lucia was sad, saying she didn't think she could survive school without him, and he laughed, assuring her there was nothing to worry about. He promised he would return soon, and she just had to wait a little longer, making Lucia smile and say she would wait. In the present, Lucia felt exhausted because lunch had ended so quickly. The trip must have been effective because Diego had been working tirelessly since then. Because of this, she had been so busy that she could barely distinguish day from night. But that was better than Diego avoiding his responsibilities as he used to before they got close. At that moment, she felt hungry and decided to buy something simple to eat. Upon entering the convenience store, she was surprised because most of the K office workers hadn't been able to eat properly and all the lunchboxes were sold out. Lucia needed to eat to keep going, but there was nothing there to recharge her energy before returning to work. As she walked through the aisles, she bent down to pick up a package of instant food. It seemed perfect. Suddenly, Diego appeared beside her, asking why she was crouched. She noticed him, and he took the instant food from her hand. Although she said it was fine, he paid for the food anyway. The two left the store, and Diego invited her to sit and eat together. They headed to the park and sat on a bench where Diego opened a drink for himself. Lucia watched him sideways as he drank. Diego noticed that Lucia was looking at him intensely, which made him blush slightly from the attention. This reminded him of how Javier Ruiz had once said that girls found it attractive when men drank exaggeratedly. This made him smile slightly, wondering if he had shown that charm unintentionally. Then he commented that he had seen someone drink like that before and found it annoying, but it was quite refreshing when he tried it himself. Lucia began to open the food she bought and asked if he had digestion problems, and he denied it, a bit frustrated by her lack of reaction. He noticed she had bought a pack of those chocolate bars she liked since training days. She was surprised that Diego remembered it and offered him one, which he took while looking away. He remembered during training days when Lucia had shown her favorite chocolate bar to the other students, saying it had the best cost-benefit ratio, even considering the low cost of 100 and taking into account the amount and flavor of the nuts. It was incomparable. Diego remembered hearing her talk about that, and it seemed she hadn't changed much from then until now. Just like before, the chocolate was still very sweet, and the caramel stuck to Diego's mouth both in the past and now. It seemed he couldn't stop looking at Lucia, no matter what she was doing. Another day, Lucia went to the elevator when Carlos approached her. He laughed, saying he had finished his work much later while Lucia had left early. She nodded, saying she was almost finishing her tasks for the day, and Carlos smiled, noting how hard she had been working lately. Extending his hand, he touched her shoulder and noticed her heavy bag, to which Lucia explained that her laptop was inside. Carlos entered the elevator, mentioning they could have dinner together, since he knew some good restaurants nearby, and she agreed that it sounded great. He confessed he had wanted to invite her to dinner since her first day working there, but she always seemed busy. This made Lucia fidget as she apologized, and they continued talking as they went up in the elevator. They went to dinner at a restaurant, and Lucia even trembled at how delicious the meat was. This made Carlos tell her not to rush and enjoy the moment to eat. Lucia felt like she was in heaven somehow, and even accepted the glass of water he offered. He asked her not to skip meals just because she was busy. She certainly looked tired. He said he wanted her to keep serving herself and eat well while they were there. The two had a good time together, eating, chatting, and smiling at each other. That night, a little later, Carlos was driving through the streets after dinner with Lucia, sighing because he would have to go to work again the next day. She groaned that she didn't want to go home, which made Carlos nervous, asking what she meant exactly. Lucia explained that if she went home, she would shower and sleep, and when she woke up it would be morning and she would have to work again. This made Carlos laugh again, noting that she seemed like a complete workaholic, but still had an active social life. This made Lucia sigh because he treated her like a little girl, although she was an assistant at work. He agreed that she was right. It seemed she had grown a lot since then, and was very good at her job to the point that Diego always praised her. Lucia apologized for what happened last time. She didn't expect the CEO to get so angry when she left his office. She supposed it was like that, but she didn't imagine he would behave that way with Carlos, which made him laugh nervously. Hesitating, Lucia thought it must be something else, because before she had been asked what kind of relationship she had with Carlos. Then she revealed that they were just childhood friends, but immediately regretted saying it because Diego had clearly gotten irritated. She knew he must have misunderstood the situation and thought Carlos was helping her because of their long friendship. She understood Diego's point of view, but it didn't seem like something to get so angry about, especially because Diego had also been curious to know if something had happened between her and Carlos at the hotel the other day. Before, Carlos had pulled Diego away from Lucia and guided her to the elevator, still holding her by the shoulder because she was too drunk to manage alone. He helped her walk to her room, commenting that she was in a complicated state. Lucia celebrated because the room was very nice, jumping like a happy girl, feeling like she was on vacation. Carlos looked at her for a moment as she tried to take off her coat, but couldn't unbutton it alone and asked for help. Although Carlos was embarrassed, he sighed because she was too drunk. As he helped her, he remembered Diego and questioned why Lucia had drunk so much when she knew she had low tolerance. He scolded her, saying she should know how dangerous it was to be so vulnerable. But she didn't see the problem and simply walked away, leaving Carlos frustrated as he sat on the bed. He sighed and covered his face with his hands, murmuring that it was too dangerous to leave her alone like that. When Lucia asked Carlos if something had happened at the hotel the day she drank, he reassured her, saying nothing had happened. This relieved her, and Carlos laughed nervously, agreeing that the CEO's personality was indeed peculiar. This made her laugh because it was true. The next day, Diego had been very demanding with his food, and while Lucia complained about him, Carlos remained silent as she spoke, but inside he couldn't help feeling that Diego was really very annoying, even too much in his opinion. Time passed for Lucia, who returned to work. In a call around 7 p.m., she said she would be home in 30 minutes, no overtime that day, and ready for dinner. She thought about buying some food on the way home and asked if they wanted Chinese food, since there were many good restaurants nearby. Then she noticed Diego behind her with an intense look and stammered, saying she thought he had already gone home. He smiled, explaining that he would stay late at the office that day, surprising her. He said he should have mentioned it before because he needed to coordinate comprehensive services related to the energy department with the plant business in the construction sector. He updated her on how busy he was with many things to schedule and manage. Then he looked at the phone in Lucia's hand, smiling discreetly as she apologized on the phone, saying she couldn't go to dinner that night. Sarcastically, Diego commented that it didn't seem like she could go out to dinner with Carlos, which left her with a less than happy expression. He said that if she had planned, she should go. If she had all the requested data, she just had to deliver it. She stammered that she hadn't finished yet, and Diego continued saying she could give him what she had because the director could do overtime alone. It was an obvious concern, and Lucia smiled, saying she couldn't allow that and would need to stay to help him. Diego was worried because Lucia survived only on chocolate bars, and instead of going home after work, he had devised an elaborate plan using 100% of his brain for this important moment. After waiting for her to finish her extra shift, he would invent an excuse to return to the office. The second step would be to order delicious food and then suddenly receive a phone call and leave just after Lucia had eaten. It was the perfect plan that would make Lucia feel even closer to him for letting her go through such a thing. However, it failed miserably in his task now, and he wondered why he needed to schedule a dinner with that guy again. Sighing, Diego leaned back on the table, murmuring that he had come to take care of her, but now he had only made her work even more. Even he himself had ended up trapped working late, which surely made him think that Lucia must be furious with him. A bit more optimistic, he hoped she would be okay if he bought something delicious to eat. He needed to make sure she ate first. With that, he left his office to discuss dinner with her, but her tired and somber face, with a forced smile, made him tense. Hesitating before approaching, he said that if she mentioned his name at restaurant F, they would take care of it, but just in case, he wrote a note and handed it to her. She replied that she would make sure to use it next time she ordered something. He even tried to talk about the risotto, but she interrupted to answer the phone, making him sweat. He wondered if he should suggest ordering 2 portions, worried that she would certainly refuse to dine with him. He could imagine Lucia making an overly detailed order, asking to spread the risotto rice, reduce the meat and increase the parmesan for the salad, perhaps mozzarella and cherry tomatoes in balsamic vinegar, basil pesto and white wine vinaigrette. Hesitating, he began to talk about the risotto, trying to gather courage to order more food than the regular dinner. However, Lucia simply hung up the phone and smiled, saying she would go out to eat and return soon to pick up her dinner on the way, leaving Diego behind in silence. Later, Lucia returned to deliver his dinner and Diego accepted it without even looking at her. Then he asked her to clarify something in the document.